So last week we left off around 15th, 16th century, and we left off listening to Solomon Rossi and that beautiful, delicious, delectable choral music. So we're actually going to pick up around the same time period, but in a completely different place. Because what you have to remember and what's challenging is that there are so many different things that are happening at the exact same time all over the world. And they're different. And it's all Jewish music. So we're going to look specifically, I said we'd get to the shores of this country. So what happens in 1654 is that there are a group of Spanish-Portuguese Jews that leave Amsterdam. They're looking for fortune, they're looking for fame, they're looking for a better life, they're looking for better trade, they're looking for better commerce, and they come to America. Where do they settle? New Amsterdam. Great, New Amsterdam. Okay, they settle on the shores here, New York. Okay, they have a little bit of a challenge. This is the first time that they're coming and they're living among other people. They're not in their own little shtetl. So they have to figure out how can they, good morning, preserve their Judaism and deal with what is happening around the world and in their own now new community with Protestant, with other religions that are there. How do they deal with that? Anyone know anything about the Spanish-Portuguese community?
Jewish community?
Spanish-Portuguese community in New York. The very first community. Okay? So here's what we know about their synagogues and their Jewish life. 1655, so remember they've arrived 1654. 1655 the first Torah arrives. And this is when we see kind of communities established and creative and a worship style kind of come forth. We haven't seen yet synagogues pop up per se. Worship has happened, and it happens within people's homes. Okay, so right now we're talking about, for those of you that just walked in, the shores of this sea and the first Jews that settle here in America, and that happens the Spanish-Portuguese community in 1654. We don't see a synagogue really come forth until 1674 and really 1703. And I know that there's a 30-year span in there, but you have the establishment of the first quote-unquote congregation, Kahal Kadosh Sheretz Israel, in 1654. 1674. When the first Torah arrives, we have only lay leadership, no rabbi. They did have a chazan, so you knew it was important.
Of course.
Where are we talking? Are we talking
New York.
Or
New Amsterdam. Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. So we know that music is important. We can surmise from this that music is important, that we needed someone that knew and was familiar with worship, familiar with the tunes, familiar with melodies, could handle officiating at all life cycle events, if you will. Still not a job for someone who wanted to make any real money, because that wasn't prevalent at that point in time. There wasn't a synagogue. This was, remember, we're still worshiping in homes. Until we get to, and here's also some fascinating information. The chazan was kind of looked at, if you looked at the church model, the reverend doctor at that point in time. So, literally the chazan becomes known as the reverend doctor. No honor, paid nothing. Sounds great. Right. Perfect. So here we have now in 1674 the establishment of Kahal Kadosh Sheretz Israel, which means Holy Congregation, Remnant of Israel. So here are the list of things that this encompasses. in this congregation. All aspects of religious life. There was kind of a group solidarity, a group camaraderie, because remember, they are coming for the first time and they are really living among other religions and in a larger community, and they've got to figure out who they are. And they've got to figure out how they maintain some of their own identity in that way. So, solidarity and coming together to form a community becomes really, really important. They value tradition and they value difference, which is important to remember. They worshipped like they were still in Europe. No innovation in liturgy. The membership tax was based on seating in their community. Synagogue had complete autonomy. They were united by commitment to community and a belief in God.
I have a question. Where did they come from? Since they were expelled from Spain in 1492, they obviously had to go someplace before they decided to come to America. Do we know where this particular group?
This particular group came from I can find it for
Could
you.
it be?
Amsterdam?
No. They came from Amsterdam, but
yeah.
they also,
Durban?
this group not so much Germany.
Okay.
This group more Amsterdam.
Okay.
Durban.
Hold on, I'm just checking for you.
Amsterdam came from.
So all of a sudden, decorum becomes a bit more important. So even though they're staying insular, they clearly have an eye on what's going on outside in other communities, right? And we see an introduction of choirs here. Now, it wasn't that this wasn't happening in Eastern Europe, because we also know that there was an introduction of choir, especially in Germany, which we'll talk about in a little while. And we know that in Eastern European Chazanut, there were also choirs that were happening. But this was different. This was looking at the Protestant community here in America and saying, okay, we need to up the ante a bit in terms of our worship style. So I want to play for you a couple of different selections that we have from the community in the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue. Now, the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue, I want you to know, still exists on the east side. A friend of mine actually in the 90s did her thesis on the Spanish-Portuguese community. Their cantor that was there, or reverend doctor or minister in that way, was Abraham Lopez Cardozo. And he served that community, I want to say, for a good 30 to 40 years. I mean, he was there for a long, long time. You're going to hear of him. She had an opportunity to, really delve into that community. So you can actually still go visit the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue. The music has stayed the same in many ways from their tradition and keeping in that way, which is just fascinating. So one of the first things that you're going to hear that I'm going to play for you, I'm going to play three things for you just because I want you to hear the differences. You're going to hear Az Yashir Moshe, okay, which comes from, anyone know? Az Yashir Moshe.
When they
Song of the Sea. That's exactly right. And you're right, Az Yashir Moshe, right? Because we know that that's the song in that one. So the beginning of the Song of the Sea, and this is what it sounds like. Oops, that is not that one.
A song at the Red Sea, when Moses and the children of Israel rejoiced in their newfound freedom and in the triumph of the Lord.
Az Yashir Moshe Ubnei Yisrael et hashira hazot l'Adonai vayomru
many traditions, and especially in the Orthodox tradition, we actually chant, that's more of the Lernensteiger mode, which is a German word for the teaching or the learning mode. And there are many communities that chant Shir Hayam each and every morning, actually, in their service and go through. And this is, more often than not, the Spanish-Portuguese melody is this Lernensteiger mode that they use. This was Cardozo chanting. Okay, yeah, it's
Great
phenomenal,
sound.
right? So you have that. Listen to their Shema.
We fervently proclaim,
So this is what happens in their service.
the Lord is our God, the Lord is one.
It's the good old days.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם
Notice the vets sound like bets.
ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשנריך.
Isn't that cool?
Oh, is that?
Right?
It is
Very similar, very close.
Yeah, it's
If the trope symbols are codified
yes,
in
they're
some
codified.
way, why doesn't that sound the same as what we sing? It should.
Well, the trope marks sound the same, but the melodies that melodic phrases that are attached to the marks, because it was an oral tradition, change depending on the community that you're in. So, what we have and what we know that's codified that is the same, that carries throughout all of our traditions, are the symbols. But the melodies that are attached to them are different. And it depends on the part of the world, it depends on your community. Clearly, Spanish-Portuguese trope is different. It's, to me, I find it unbelievably beautiful. It just is, and yet there are nuances that sound similar in terms of where just melodies are raised and lowered in that way, and the scales in that way. But it's not the same in any way, shape, or form. And we heard it last week too, that we heard the differences between some of the different, whether we heard the Iraqi trope or the Babylonian trope, and the different places, and the Ashkenazi trope, different. I mean, and that's the beauty of it to me, is that, lest we think that we should be in a box and this is our tradition and this is what we know. Our tradition is vast and varied and extraordinarily beautiful, with so much depth, because our people have come from all over the world, and they still are all over the world. So it's important for us to really, as I said at the end of last week, really look with open hearts and open minds to decide not only, what for ourselves is Jewish music, because as I said, for each of us, to say what is traditional for us is going to be different one from the next. But to recognize that each of this, though, and each of these melodies, each of these communities are inherently Jewish. And their music is part of who we are and our makeup as a peoplehood in that way. We may not know it. My job for just these little 3 weeks is to give you snippets of things that you may never have heard before, to open your minds and say, oh my gosh, there's a wealth of music out there and of tradition out there that it's so hard to uncover all of it. I mean, we can't do it in 3 weeks. There are so many different things. We could sit here, I have a video that's 50 minutes, we could watch the whole 50 minutes and be blown away. We're not gonna do it, we're gonna watch 3 minutes of it. But there's just so much. So have fun. The last selection that I'm gonna play for you is also also from the Spanish-Portuguese shul, and this brings the choir in a bit so that you get to hear that. So you hear, you know, in terms of what I said in terms about the European worship and really keeping to that, that is what you've heard now, right? Now we're going to expand a bit into some of the choral that happens also within this community. Ode to, maybe we need to modernize and bring in a little bit, but we're not going to go too far with that, because we can't, we're going to stay within our community and our tradition.
It is good to give thanks to the Lord and to sing praise
Right?
to
Can
thy
you
name,
imagine?
O Most High.
What does this remind you of that we heard last week? Anything?
Yeah, the Rossi.
Great, Julie. Gregorian chant, right?
No, they're not equal.
They're going off to rehearsal for another program.
Magadu Masech Adonai, Psalm 92. The Psalm for Shabbos. Okay, so you hear now, there's that ode to Gregorian chant, but you're bringing in more voices. They do have, if, let me see if I can pull up for you. I'm not sure I can. Hold on. They do have more choral that does come in to this community. So when they go to, no, I don't have it here. Maybe I do. Hold on. Here we go.
Let us welcome the Sabbath, the beloved bride, the Queen,
Gives you just a
with
little,
song and with
right?
praise.
Sounds like a radio show.
This is the Farodi. So here you hear more than one part or two parts of music that's happening. All male. Not particularly complex. So people could very easily participate.
Congregational singing.
Okay, so you get that idea.
Who's the narrator? Is that Sal Zinn by any chance? No.
No, it's people from the, and I could go back and pull, I don't have the CD
That's
with
okay.
me here,
That's
but there's a box set that I have. But it's from the community, wholly indigenous to the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue, which Salzim is not a part of.
Yeah, I know.
So it is their reverend minister, you know, rabbi that will narrate in that way with the community. So fascinating to see that you have snippets of the Chazan leading, you know, certain things in worship, and then you have choral, almost like the Gregorian chant, and then you have a little bit more. It's easier to kind of show it in layers, you know, almost with your hands, right? Because you have one line that is sheer Chazan vocal line, and then you have a little bit more depthful in terms of just either unison or maybe one note difference in terms of what they're singing. And then you see with the Chadodi, it gets a little bit more expansive in terms of their musical flow. That is really the first synagogue that we see pop up here. So I encourage you, if any of you end up in New York, go and check out you know, the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue, because it's still there. It's a beautiful synagogue. And you can go in and you can still worship and be a part of their community. It's fascinating to walk in and really see that a community has stayed within their worship and musical structure, that you're not going to find so much difference in terms of how we in the Reform movement will grab from, now those more modern composers. They actually have really stayed in terms of what happens musically within their community. Julie, you had a question or comment?
You know about the Toros Synagogue?
I do know about the
Yeah.
Torah synagogue.
Okay, that's old, that's probably older than the stuff, it may be older than the stuff you're talking.
It's actually not, but they're right around the same time. So you have certain synagogues, but you also have the synagogue in Charleston,
Yeah.
and that we know in that way. But I think it's important to look at, and you see the synagogue in Charleston and Truro really taking from the Protestant community and coming over. And they come over, and those Jews that landed and started those synagogues come really from more of the German background and the Vienna reforms that are happening. These are not those yet, and that's why I wanted to focus on this very first synagogue, is to be able to say, let's look at the Spanish-Portuguese tradition that comes over and really tries to keep within the bounds of their own community from Amsterdam to New Amsterdam in that way, as opposed to the Jews that come over to Charleston, who are really dealing with what is happening in the choral Protestant world, out there, and how do they take those reforms and then build the Jewish community in that way. We could spend weeks and weeks on just the Charleston Synagogue and the Charleston Jewish community. If you haven't been down there, it's absolutely to go and explore to the Jews of the South is incredible. Really, really incredible heritage and incredible community in that way. So take advantage of what we have here in this country in terms of the roots of our Judaism and the roots of our Reform Judaism, because it's awesome. And I don't mean that in it's awesome, but it's awe-inspiring in that way. So now I want to jump us. So that's what's happening Amsterdam, what's happening in New York in that way. But we have to also look, and remember I said everything is happening at the same time, in many ways. We're going to jump a couple hundred years, and by that I still really mean it's the same time, in many ways. Because you're looking at the 1700s, now we're going to look at the 1800s. And we have to look at Germany, because that is really where we would say we get the bulk of our Reform Judaism and our reforms coming and our music. So, take a few. We're going to stick to the first page right now. I know I give you a big, huge, fat packet, and it was because I couldn't decide what to give you, so I had to give you everything. That's not even remotely everything, because if you notice, that's how I roll. You have lots of fun things to look at the back when you get to the back, but you got it. I should have more than enough fun, everybody. Kim, do you get one? How do you? Okay. So, let's talk about Germany and the Hamburg reforms. Okay? So here is what is challenging, I'll just tell you about teaching this class, is it's hard to look at just the music, which I really kind of wanted us to spend time on, but we could also look at it really from a historical perspective and spend the whole time looking at it from a historical perspective. Because you have the Pittsburgh platforms and you have the Hamburg reforms, and it's challenging to not read all of those things and then understand how we get to where we get musically. So I've tried to give us just a tiny little base and touch on everything. So we know that in Germany, we have this unbelievable need to try to acculturate at a certain point in time. We want to excel in education. We want to excel in intellectual pursuits. We want to excel in artistic pursuits. We want to be like our Protestant neighbors. We're sick of kind of the shtetl mentality. At this point in time, we need to break out. We don't want to be different. As opposed to the Spanish Portuguese, who valued difference when they came to this country. We in Germany, we don't want to be so different anymore. It's not good for us. We want to assimilate and be like our neighbors. Exactly. We see a change and a challenge to Jewish law, halakha. We see a challenge in traditional worship models that we've known. And we see a challenge especially when we look at melodies and we look at worship and we look at music. So what happens in terms of the changes in the synagogue and the Reformed synagogue, we'll call it, we see an adherence to strict decorum, because if you look at the church, they see strict decorum, and they want that for us in our community. A new prayer book is developed. Inclusion of prayers in German we start to see, which is a change because we have only been chanting, reading in Hebrew. Now we're seeing native language, German, come into play. We see modification of liturgy. We see omission of traditional prayers, especially when it had to do with the mention of Zion, because we are not Zionists in Germany at this point in time. We want nothing to do with it. So any mention of the Messianic era or Zion comes out of that prayer book. No way, no how. Organ music is introduced. Oh, we haven't had anything like that. Remember, there's a prohibition against instrumentation, right? We learned that last week. We no longer chant Torah. Nope. We read it. And the sermons are given in German. Whoa. Just saying. If you look, I know we said we were going to stay on the first page. Go to page 3. I know. Sorry. Look at page 3 for a second. Page 3 is the index from the Union Hymnal. This is the very first hymnal. It's created in 1897.
Well,
Okay, so if you look at the index of Hebrew hymns and responses, you see Baruch, Shema, Baruch Hu, Michamocha, Adonai Yimloch, Adon Olam, V'anachnu, Kaddish, right? Going down to Ein Eloheinu and a few different selections. Then, if you flip the page, oh, and notice, this hymnal is edited by the Central Conference of American Rabbis. The music is selected and arranged by the Society of American Cantors. Okay? This becomes fascinating when you flip the page and you see the index from 1914.
oh,
And you get a union hymnal for Jewish worship published by the Central Conference of American Rabbis. What's missing?
the Cantors.
Correct.
And so it begins.
I didn't say it, you did.
Cantor, I just read an article in the Dasa magazine about the congregation in Jamaica, which until the new Reform rabbi came a couple of years ago, had been using the 1898 Union Hymnal.
Awesome.
And,
Wow.
and he cannot break them away from that.
I have no doubt in my mind. It's like it's like Sinai that uses UPB,
Yeah, right.
right?
No, that I heard.
No way, no how. It's not moving. So now take a look for a second, because in the contents of the Union Hymnal, you see an index of authors, composers, so they're in there somewhere,
What
right?
page are we on now?
We are on page 4. You see an index of metrical psalms, an index of subjects, an index of Hebrew hymns and responses, an index of children's services. So that's changed. Now they're creating new liturgy. Some worship for children in that way. If you look at the composers and the sources as well, you still have Zulzer, you have many more composers in here that are not necessarily Jewish music composers.
Sarge.
Right.
Robert Schumann.
French melodies.
Sir Michael.
Handel. Right?
Anglo Jazz.
Yeah. So
Scotch
there.
melody.
Right. So what do we discern from the difference between 1897 to 1914 in terms of the hymnal usage?
Standing. Big culture.
Say that again.
Assimilation.
Assimilation, acculturation. Absolutely, positively. Rabbis are no longer asking for the Cantorial Association's input on music. They're going to decide what's going in and what's going on. And we see a divergence, shall I say, from tradition. Right?
One of the things, of the many things I admire about you, Cantor, is that you include in our High Holy Day worship some of these composers.
Absolutely.
Whose music, as you know, I love. It's so majestic, and I'm glad that we do have it because
Absolutely.
it's our history.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So now I'm going to ask you to flip back to the first page. And I'd like someone to read the selection from Org Noga from Eliezer Lieberman. Eliezer Lieberman, just to let you know, is the son of a rabbi. He's a Talmud scholar in and of himself. And he uses this particular passage to justify the Hamburg reform that is going on. He uses this as an argument against halakha and rabbinic opinion. He uses all of that and incorporates. So will someone read this selection, please?
Why should we not draw a lesson from the peoples among whom we live? Look at the Gentiles and see how they stand in awe and reverence and with good manners in their house of prayer.
Love that.
No one utters a
Gets
word,
better.
no one moves a limb.
Don't move, people.
Adverb.
Their ears and all their senses
German.
are directed to the words of the preacher and to the recitation of their prayers. Now judge, please, you blessed of God, people of the Lord, seedlings of the faithful, how much more there is for us to do. Will someone say that it is prohibited to learn from our neighbors, for ye shall not abide by their statutes? Leviticus 18:3. Will it occur to a man of intelligence that we should distance ourselves from a good and righteous act because we do not esteem he who performs it?
What's going on here, guys? What's he say?
That the Jews don't, that we don't listen, or that they have been learned to listen and behave like, I don't know.
Like the Gentiles.
Decent human beings.
Like the Gentiles.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It seems to me that in a negative way, they are saying that the Jewish services were not very orderly.
Right. Or what was deemed appropriately orderly. Because we all know from being in different communities, what we might take as a little bit of mayhem or joy or reverence in a certain way, they're saying reverence is this,
It's good and righteous too.
not in any other way.
It's a total assimilation into the German community.
Absolutely. 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 And he's using argument, right? He's using text.
Yeah.
How can we not do this? Of course, it says it right here.
How did they learn that? Do they go to Protestant churches and see or what?
Stood around the windows
Yeah.
looking at.
I mean, there are, when you're trying to come into a community and learn and say, how do we do it? You know, did they go to church? Maybe. Did they have people that overlapped, possibly, musically and otherwise? Maybe. Did they interact on a daily basis in terms of their lives and their jobs? Absolutely. So you learn, right? You can intuit and you figure out in many ways.
Are they referring to what we might still see in some ultra-conservative synagogues where during what we would think of as silent prayer or meditation time, there's all this chatter and people coming and going?
Maybe.
Or is that a different time?
No, maybe. I mean, it could have been, we weren't there then, but I'm imagining when when we were davening, you know, in a traditional shul, you would have a mechitza, so the men and the women would be separate. And it wasn't, remember, there was a chazan or you know, a learned one that would daven, and we weren't singing choral music, and everybody was davening a little bit on their own, and you caught up to where, and then, so that, they didn't want that. That was chaos, all of a sudden in worship.
And that still goes on if you go to any, well, when I go to the conservative shul I grew up in, the morning service is simply that, and
Right.
the leader is just cueing people where
Exactly,
he
that's
is.
exactly right.
But
Exactly.
and then, once the participant comes in, it's a different game.
Totally. I want to move us along,
Okay.
because I want us to continue to look, because we have a lot to cover in very little time. So hold that thought, Julie. So now so we know that that's going on in Hamburg, Germany, right? Now we have to look at Vienna. Because Vienna is the other place where we see large reform going on, a little bit differently. So the Vienna Reform is organized in 1790, and we have to talk about Solomon Zulzer and Louis Lewandowski, because we would be remiss if we did not. So Zulzer comes in to serve as Cantor and choir director in Vienna in 1826. He lives from 1804 to 1890. He served for 21 years as the Cantor and choir director, the Vienna Shul. He's really known for gathering our Jewish musical tradition and publishing volumes according to the prayer book that occurred, Mannheimer's prayer book, in Vienna. He paid in his music proper attention and specific attention to diction, musical form, and harmony that wed the text and sacred sounds together. So this is the first time we see really in choral music. He wrote mainly in two-part, although we do see a few things in four-part, but mainly in two-part. He reintroduced dignity and decorum into Jewish music through this choral settings of music. So kind of keeping with the tradition of and modes of our Jewish heritage, but also with definitely a huge eye towards what's happening in the Protestant world. Okay? So let's read, before we play a couple of selections, let's read Zulzer's response to the Hamburg Reform and what's going on in Vienna. Have a reader, the next one.
In the first place, it behooves us to fight the opinion that the regeneration of the service can be materialized only by an entire break with the past, by abolishing all traditional and inherited, historically evolved liturgy.
I love him.
Quick words.
I'm just saying,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
Take that in for a second, right? Lest we think we should forget everything we know, people. That's not okay. Okay, go on. Sorry.
To limit the entire service to a German hymn before and after the sermon, to give a certificate of divorce to tradition, was the intention of those who instigated the ill-fated reform in Hamburg and Berlin.
So what does he think about the Hamburg Reform, people? He's not so in favor of it.
But to me it appeared that the confusion of the synagogue service resulted from the need of only a restoration which should remain on historical ground, and that we might find out the original noble forms to which we should anchor, developing them in artistic style.
Okay, so what's he saying here?
Keep it, just tweak it, as we would say today. Just
Exactly.
tweak it.
Exactly.
But it also is grounded in.
Correct, absolutely.
The old generations should recognize a familiar and endeared element, while the young generation should be educated to the appreciation of it. Jewish liturgy must satisfy the musical demands while remaining Jewish.
Aha!
And it should not be necessary to sacrifice the Jewish characteristics to artistic forms. The old tunes and singing modes which became national should be improved, selected, and adjusted to the rules of art. But also, new musical creation should not be avoided. I love it.
Right?
It's a conservative liberal.
That's right, but he's rooted and he's grounded. So where the Hamburg reform, what he takes issue with is that it was throw the baby out with the bathwater. And here it is, no guys, it's okay to change, but it's gotta be grounded and rooted in our tradition. Don't forget that. That happens to be my own personal philosophy, so I love him.
Really?
I love the new one.
I do. So let's listen to him. Oh, where are you? You're all gonna know this. Men and women. So we're kind of comfortable with that, right? In many ways? Our younger generation would say, huh,
Yeah, where's the guitar?
Who needs it?
right? In that way. This grounds us, yet our community then would say, this is brand new, remember, if you're in the 1800s, right? And where is my,
Yeah.
but you have a line at the beginning that is rooted in modality. And that's where you come from. And Zulzer remember, pays specific attention to modes and to diction. So really, really important in that way when you're writing for choral music. And it's why now when we're in this new age of, contemporary music out there, wanting to make sure that the composers that we bring in know Jewish musical modes so that they can write for specific times, because their music will get more play in many more communities for those of us that really want to be rooted in tradition. And then we can say, but guys, we are rooted in tradition in that way. So it's really important for the composers out there, in my opinion, that are new Jewish composers out there, to be rooted in the modes. And remember, our modes signify the time of day, the time of year, so that you know when you walk into the synagogue what time it is. Okay? So now, let's look at what Idelson says on the back page, page 2, of Zulzer. Just so you know, Abraham Idelson is an ethnomusicologist, a Jewish musicologist. He is one of the first and leading pioneers of Jewish music to write about Jewish music from a historical context.
That's cool.
Okay? Yeah, his book is phenomenal. I mean, there are many mistakes in it as well, but his book is phenomenal, because he was writing about this stuff before anybody else was. So can I have someone to read for that?
But one improvement of far-reaching significance Zulzer brought into the synagogue, which contribution alone would have made his name unforgettable in history. And this is dignity. Dignity of the song and the dignity of the singer. Toward the young end of the 18th century, the song had become decadent to the point of caricature. It was an imitation of every low type of vapid secular music, and it had in consequence lost all power to inspire any devotion and to elevate the spirit. In his casting aside all the musical products of the 18th century, and in his introduction of the pseudo church, in classical style with powerful harmony, Sulzer restores the synagogue music its tone of dignity.
So this is from a Jewish musical historical perspective. Idelson is saying this about Sulzer and what Sulzer manages to do. So we also have to look at Lewandowski. Lewandowski it lives from 1821 to 1894, and Lewandowski is pretty much almost like the apprentice, in a certain sense, of Sulzer. He's not, but it's almost as if, because they equate, Sulzer and Lewandowski are almost used simultaneously. They're used in place of one another because of how similar they were in terms of what Lewandowski learned from Sulzer. Sulzer was an apprentice to Cantor Asher Lyon. Lewandowski. Lewandowski was the first Jew to attend the Academy of Arts in Berlin. Okay, that's huge. He's a choir master and a conductor of Sulzer's music for 24 years. So that's really why they go hand in hand, because he learned so much from Solomon Sulzer. We see Lewandowski creating a new service for the first time with organ accompaniment in Berlin. Full organ accompaniment. Not the organ accompaniment like Sulzer did. Sulzer's organ accompaniment really mirrored the parts that he wrote. Okay, now we see an expanse in terms of accompaniment on the organ. We see 4-part writing that really comes from Lewandowski. And he becomes really the primary Western Ashkenazi influence in music in, 50 years after his death. We're still singing his music. Exactly right. Exactly right. So of course we have this.
Brings us back.
Right? Matovu. You have to memorize this piece in school. I mean,
Sandy, this is Lewandowski, right?
Secha. Men and women. Then you have Cantor that's going to come in. So he writes for Cantor and choir. I'll just play the Cantor line and then we have to be done. Then the choir's going to.
So that was a Lewandowski arrangement?
That's Lewandowski.
Yeah, we used to use
Very
that one.
majestic.
Oh, yeah.
Very,
Absolutely.
very majestic, and the
Yeah.
cantor sounds like Richard Cohen.
It's not.
I know, but it sounds like it.
Okay, so remember now things are happening simultaneously. That now we've dealt with Nuremberg, we've dealt with Germany, with Hamburg, with Vienna. We now have to go to the Eastern European Jews in 10 minutes. An
No
influx, a steady influx of Eastern European Jews come to this country 1880 to 1924. It is unbelievable time of survival and adjustment for them. They're lost. Adaptation, evolving, trying to figure out who they are, age of enlightenment, and of course we have the rich, beautiful golden age of Chazanut, my personal favorite.
10 minutes?
Cantors were coming over to this country. Now remember, in Eastern Europe, they're living in the shtetl. The cantors are making a living by traveling around, and they have their choristers with them. Then they find out they can come to this country, and lo and behold, they might actually flourish here. There might be a need for them here, so we're going to come on over. They have an unbelievable task and a beauty in terms of what they do, where they really are able to bridge shtetl life with the modern age, with modern city. Because remember, when we come over, and our Eastern European relatives come over, they're living in the tenements. Life is hard. Life is not good. It's hard to make a living. It's hard to feel like you are on the outside. You need some reverence. You need some spiritual nourishment. And they get it from the Chazanim that come over. Quite honestly. About 18% of Jews during this time are affiliated with the synagogue. Interesting.
They don't have time for anything.
Probably. Or money or anything like that. We know at this point in time, cantorial art is flourishing. 1905, the Jewish Minister Cantors Association is formed. That is a mouthful to say. These Chazanim, their jobs were to guide and inspire spirituality. They were deemed as poetic mystics. They created really and really embellished the cantorial improvisation during this point in time. They were able to bond spirit with music. How did you learn how to become a chazan?
By rote.
Apprentice.
By rote.
Who else apprenticed? Who did we talk about last week? There was an apprenticeship. Remember?
How did rabbis?
Levitical choirs.
Oh, Leviticus.
Right? The Levites needed to apprentice for 5 years before they could sing. So we have a direct correlation in terms of how one became a chazan. It was a family business. Or if you were a chorister, if you were a mishorer, which is actually what I wrote my thesis on, was the mishorerim of the synagogue. That's a whole other class that we'll have a great time with. But if you were a mishorer, you were a young boy, and someone discovered your vocal talent, they took you, put you in their choir, traveled around, you got free room and board, it was great. Because you weren't making any money, but at least someone took care of you a little bit. You sang all over the place, and a chazan took you under his wing, and you became the apprentice. Not bad. We know at this point in time, too, because we have a raising of the bar, so to speak, this improvisation and this cantorial flourishment really inspired, again, the deep reverence for Nusach, for those traditional melodies and modes, which had kind of sort of been lost. And now it's coming back. Concerts, benefits, charities, new arrangements for liturgical texts popped up all over the place. And of course we have Tim Hanley in Yiddish theater, where you have the great cantors that were seen singing in the synagogue and then singing on the stage. So they had to make a living in that way. So I want to play for you. You might have to gather around. I want to play for you. Hopefully this will work. You never know. This is not the remote for that. This is the remote. This is David Roitman. David Roitman. Can I write him down? Hold on. Let's see. He is born in the Ukraine.
Page 8.
Comes to this.
8.
Thank you. You can find him. There he is.
Bottom.
Right. I just had to include these, right? Because they're so fun. These were your cantorial golden age of the cantors. This is just 2 out of 3 pages. And if you look on page 6, This is the Jewish Ministers Cantors Association, 40th anniversary, 1896 to 1936. I mean, it doesn't get better than this.
I love this.
Right? Is that not so cool?
It is very cool.
Oh, man.
What? I want a hat like that. You have to order them online because you can't get them anywhere. It's really hard to find them. They're called nighters. Okay.
Who was he?
Great man.
Notice the choir. No instrumentation. They're providing the instrumentation. That's what we did. We hummed underneath. That was their job. Change key, change pitch, get them where they were going. Provide the accompaniment.
And no one's looking at their music choir.
Yeah, he had one of the sweetest lyrical tenor voices. Then they show these random clips of like old Jew stuff, like, which is kind of funny. But
When's this from? When's this supposed to be from?
this is probably 1920s.
Or early 30s. They had sound, so it gotta be like.
No, because Rosenblatt records in 1926. You notice that the quality is not correct. But to find these clips of these famous Chazanim and be able to speak recordings, but we don't often have clips of watching them sing, which is just.
There's a lot of that reel to reel, I bet.
Right. There's the wall without the mechitza. That's right. That's right. You hear the boys, right? You hear the Meshorim that are boys. Meshorim, typically, there wasn't a full choir. You'd have a tenor, a bass, and a boy. And that was all you would have. You'd have three that were around you, give or take. Right? So that's just one little.
Chazan David Reutemann, born in 1884, passed away in 1943 at the age of 59, sings Av HaRachamim.
it's unbelievable, right, to have those things at our fingertips. This was the way, I know we have to end, but this was how Jewish music education was really transmitted, was through becoming a chorister and learning. And if you were lucky enough, you apprenticed with somebody who was good enough musically that would write and could write out parts and would show you, but otherwise you learned everything orally. Clearly they were holding music there, so there was probably a line or so that they were following at that point in time. But that's how you learned at that point in time, which was extraordinary. But the art of the golden age of Chazanut was at this time period where these Chazanim could do no wrong, and Jewish music was at its height in that way, in terms of cantorial embellishment and Chazanut that was happening, which is so fascinating to what's happening right in Germany, and in looking at what was happening, let's say, in Charleston. This was not happening in Charleston. You know, Zulzer and Lewandowski was happening. But yet these things are really, they're occurring at the same time. So again, we see all of these various aspects of our tradition. One is not wrong, one is not right. But they're all richly ours. And my job as a chazan, hopefully, is to be able to take these moments of Zulzer and Lewandowski, take some of these moments from the great chazanim that are out there, and bring it all together so that we get to experience our rich musical heritage. This is an age that's dying. This music was written for a man's voice.
Mm-hmm.
There are very few women, honestly, that can do chazanut really, really, really well. Like this. When I was little, or younger, not little, but younger, my chazan, Nate Lamb, studied with Moshe Ganchoff. Moshe Ganchoff was the apprentice for Pierre Pinchak, who's also one of the greats. When I was younger and I was kind of apprenticing with Nate, he would make me sit in his office and he would play me tapes or records of the great chazanim. Who's this? Analyze this. I mean, I used to have to just listen and listen and listen. So for me, while I said I love Solomon Zulzer, and I do, and I love his philosophy, and I love the choral music, I think it's a vast, beautiful tradition that is ours. For me, this is what does it for me. This stirs my soul. This, to me, is the angst and the cry of our people with the inspiration and the enlightenment and the beauty and the heritage. And every day I would say, I wish I was born a man so that I could sing like that. Because that's what I knew, and I grew up hearing Nate. I mean, it was, to me, this is it. So next week we move on to modern, although we didn't, there are a couple things that I didn't get to play for you this week, so I'll play them for you next week. We'll start with that, and I want to play a couple of Yiddish pieces for you from Yiddish theater of Cantor Rosenblatt, because you got to hear the greatest, singing a Yiddish mama and things like that, because that's what they did. So we'll start with that, and then we'll move on to some of the composers of contemporary times now. But I hope that this just gave you a little bit of a twist and enlightenment into what was happening from 17th century to 20th century. Unbelievably, we spanned all of those centuries. In terms of our Jewish musical heritage, have a beautiful end of Pesach. Chag Sameach. Thank you, thank you. Enjoy the fabulous day.